Hello and welcome back my friends to a new Kerbal Space Program video. So today we have another SSTO video and having a nice launch here with a small secondary angle down there. So today we have a super exciting mission. We're going to both moons of Kerbal, that being the Mun and Minmus. So but before we start, there's a small note I would like to make, and that's if you're more interested in enjoying some nice background music instead of me explaining and talking about the mission itself, and want to have a rather shorter version, a bit more compact, and not these 14-ish minutes here, then I would really suggest you checking out the music video version. The link for that is in the top right corner in the info box, or actually the video itself already said it in the very beginning if you've paid attention to the text on screen. Okay, great. With that out of the way, we can now talk a bit about the design, as well as now entering the time accelerated footage here. The approach, well, before we're talking about the design, let's talk about the Ascent Profile a tiny bit. Since we have a very high thrust to weight ratio with those two Rapier engines, I went for first a rather steep climb to get up to altitude, where we were then accelerating as much as we could horizontally before starting to pitch up, and at around 20-ish kilometers pitching up and going into the vertical speed. And once the thrust from the Rapiers drops, like you can see here, since there's no longer enough air, we switch to the closed cycle mode, paying attention to the oxidizer amount in the top right corner, and then just leaving some oxidizer for later stages of the mission. And with that, the biggest part of the acceleration towards orbit has been completed, and we just have to do a small circularization burn. And yeah, so now with the basic, well, actually pretty decent analysis of how we got into orbit, let's talk a bit about the design before jumping to our, well, actually the last orbit racing maneuver. So I split the encounter / orbit racing burn, transfer burn, there we go, that's the word I was totally forgot, even though it's like literally written down before me. I've split up the burns to make it a bit more efficient, like in most of my SSTO videos I talk about that, splitting up the burn time, since we have a rather low thrust to weight ratio with the nerve engines, even though for this small compact craft we have a rather high thrust to weight ratio, since, well, it has only like one nuclear engine and a small fuselage. Anyways, now finally to the design. That's the thing, the tangent there was a bit overkill. Anyway, so the design, as you obviously can see, consists out of built around one nuclear engine in the core and then two Rapiers on the side to make it symmetrical. However, I wanted to opt for still a smaller design than the regular one, so that's why the central core behind the cockpit, as you saw earlier, and now in just a second we'll be able to see very good, is behind the cockpit. There's one of those Mark 1 to Mark 0 adapters going down into a Mark 0 fuselage, and to this Mark 0 fuel tanks, like those liquid fuel tanks from Mark 0, we have attached the two side pods, which are on which the wings as well as the Rapiers are mounted. So that gives us a rather small and compact profile, and at the end, kind of when the engines, kind of at the end of the Rapier engines, we have again an expanding connector to attach the nuclear engine to that, because that's obviously again the Mark 1 pod. Further to mention, just before touching down here on the Mun, we have those space shuttle like wings used for our craft design, and the only really point worth mentioning after touchdown, and here we have a nice beautiful touchdown on the Mun. However, this was only the first touchdown on a moon in this video. Speaking of touchdown, actually, doing these kinds of touchdowns or just landing burns in general with nuclear engines is a bit time consuming. Well, you have to start burning and start to slow down and decelerate rather early, because like I mentioned earlier, the lower thrust to weight ratio. However, with this specific craft, since it's smaller craft, it is not that bad as, for example, with my Mark 3 SSTO line. Speaking of that, if you're interested in a Mark III SSTO, I would really suggest you go and check out some of my Mark III SSTO videos on this channel. And maybe I'm going to link something in the top right corner. Yeah. So after the nice touchdown, our brave Kerbal pilot is running out of the cockpit there, and of course deploying a flag, since planting flags is pretty much one of the most important parts of every manned Kerbal Space Program mission, right? So we're now planting a nice little flag here, and of course mentioning that we're landing in a nice SSTO, and of course the first step. And earlier you saw me lowering, kind of retracting the landing gear and lowering the craft down to the slightly lower height so that the Kerbal can enter and first exit and now enter without using the RCS. Obviously we could use the RCS since the gravity on the Mun is low enough for it, but I thought let's go for another kind of way, because I usually do that all the time, and just use the wings as a small ladder. Okay, now we're back to the wings. The larger of those two space shuttle wings, kind of the small leading wing, and then the big one, the big real wing, this triangular one. This one is actually angled up a tiny bit by around 3 to 4 degrees. When attaching, you can enable this rotate mode by pressing in a VAB the hotkey number 3, kind of the number, and then you can turn your parts. And there we've turned up the wing by approximately 3 degrees, maybe a bit more, like 4 or something. And this is in order to provide some lift whilst pointing perfectly flat. So when our angle of attack is 0, those wings have an actual angle of around, like I said, 3 degrees, and with that they are producing lift. I know this is not how lift is actually produced, well, not only, in other words. However, in Kerbal Space Program, lift is only produced when your wing surfaces or your craft itself has some sort of angle of attack and kind of facing against the airflow. But anyways, now after rolling up a bit towards that crater so that we're pointing up a tiny bit, we engage the rapiers for a short amount of time in order to get clear of the surface of the Mun and gain some altitude, and then we're heading off. Speaking of this takeoff from the Mun, it is a bit annoying, or a bit more difficult takeoff than for example from Minmus, because we have no air, thus the wings are completely obsolete, dead weight, and we have a not that high thrust weight ratio, so we do need to kind of point our engines down and accelerate up quite a substantial amount, at least in comparison, to get clear of the terrain before going for a kind of burning towards orbit. And if you try to accelerate while still on the ground while rolling, all those hills and bumps really do screw you up a bit, or quite often at least. Anyways, after getting into a lunar orbit and doing a ejection burn towards Minmus by raising our apoapsis to the height of Minmus at the right time, that's why we actually launched a slightly different timing than when we landed. We still had to do a correction burn, not too big, but still some correction burn to get a nice equatorial encounter with the minty Mun of Minmus. Well, the minty Mun of Kerbal being Minmus. There you go. This was not a very efficient actually transfer from the Mun to Minmus, but we have so much excess fuel. I mean, 1400-ish meters per second. That's more than enough fuel to just be a bit more, comfortable in piloting. And this craft has no issues at all getting to Luna and back. This might be actually something in a future video, so stay tuned. Be sure to subscribe to see that one coming in the future. Wow, actually managed to say that not at the end but during the video itself. That's really good. Always have to remind the viewers to subscribe. Anyway, so now whilst kind of on our approach or landing towards on Minmus, we stumbled upon this small little marker here, which is actually the Minty base. So for those of you who don't know the Minty base, that is a small well, obviously surface base, but surface slash mining slash refueling base that we have built and sent to Minmus in one of my live streams. Not quite sure which one, but anyways, in one of my live streams. And in that live stream we actually as well sent another SSTO to this base and docked to it. And with that we have a nice perfect touchdown a few hundred meters away from the base. Now dropping down the nose and jumping down onto our landing gear to roll the last couple of 100 meters to the base. Since, well, the flats are very flat and we have no problems rolling a bit towards the base and kind of conserving not having to lift off and land closer to that thing. Anyways, so if you haven't seen the live stream or haven't seen the live stream video actually, because there is a highlights version which is compacted down to the most interesting bits and pieces, so there should be a link in the top right corner as well, so you should go and have a look if you're interested in how this SSTO that you can see here and the base itself got here. Anyway, since there is already a flag here, I decided to check this flag out, but as you can see here, there is nothing written on the flag, so I decided to take the flag down and update it. We're going to call the flag again, or the site in that case, again Minty Mining, or Minty Base is what I said earlier, but it was actually Minty Mining, or Minty Mining Base. Anyways, I'm now confused. Anyhow, so we wrote down that we've now visited this base, not with one SSTO, the one from the live stream, and the one that is attached to the base, and yes, this base is made so that SSTOs can attach to it and refuel. But no, we've visited now with this new SSTO as well. And after a short stay on the surface, we're blasting off with the remaining oxidizer being used for the first initial kick to gain enough altitude. Even though on the surface of Minmus and now with our lower mass, since we've burned most of our fuel already, our thrust to weight ratio has obviously improved drastically. However, still we did have some oxidizer left, and this is the perfect opportunity and way to use the remaining oxidizer just to make it a rather safe escape. After then, reducing our orbital velocity around Kuban down into down so that we have a nice aerobraking path, and well, yeah, nice aerobraking path to slow ourselves down from our very high orbit. Since the craft was that light, we actually overdid it in our initial aerobraking pass, and we had to raise our periapsis again above the atmosphere so that we could wait a couple of orbits around Kuban before going for our final re-entry to land on the KSC. Since, you know, landing a SSTO mission back at the runway on the KSC or one of the other sites runways is a very, well, not really crucial, but a very interesting and also good kind of way of accomplishing and perfectly finishing off and sending off the mission in my eyes. So that's why we had of course enough fuel to do that, so that's why we've raised the orbit again and waited until we had a nice opportunity to land, or nice approach actually, to land at the KSC runway. If you want to have a guide or something how to land the KSC runway, there is a video if you search it up on YouTube or on the channel directly. But anyways, now on to the landing itself. Thanks to our very good flight characteristics, we can really lose a lot of speed while still staying airborne, and that's where our touchdown was slightly further down the runway than initially maybe planned. But anyways, it was nice, or is a very good and successful landing without things, bits and pieces blowing up and flying off, and with our craft standing still. The mission is a complete success. So on this note, we're just going to taxi back, and I thank you guys very, very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this Kerbal Space Program video, and if you have, then please drop a like as well as subscribe for future content. Thanks very much for watching, and until next time, enjoy the rest of your day, my friends.